Good afternoon, friends. As you are aware, on the 30th of March, Prime Minister will be departing for a visit to 3 countries. He'll be going to Belgium. From there, he will proceed to Washington, D.C. to participate in the Nuclear Security Summit. And on the return leg, he will visit Saudi Arabia. To brief you on these 3 very important visits, I have with me 3 of my colleagues, Srimati Nandini Singla, Joint Secretary Europe West, Shri Amandeep Singh Gill, Joint Secretary Disarmament and International Security Affairs, and Shri Mridul Kumar, Joint Secretary Gulf. We will start this briefing in chronological order, in the order in which Prime Minister will be conducting the visit. So first, I will request Nandini to brief you on the details of Prime Minister's program in Brussels. After that, I will have Aman brief you on Prime Minister's program in Washington, D.C., and then Mridul will brief you on the Prime Minister's visit to Riyadh. So let us begin with Nandini.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. Prime Minister's visit to Brussels in Belgium on 30th March will be his first official visit to Belgium. The visit will be significant in that there will be 2 separate visits and 2 separate summit meetings in the space of 1 day. One is the Prime Minister's first bilateral summit meeting with Belgium, and the second would be the 13th India-EU Summit meeting. And both of them will take place the same day, that is 30th of March. It will therefore be an intense day of meetings and engagements for the Prime Minister. The summit meeting with Belgium will be in the forenoon of the 30th. Prime Minister will reach in the morning on 30th, and in the forenoon he starts his official engagement with Belgium. As you know, Belgium, although a small country, headquarters the European Union. It is an influential and rich EU member state. It has a strong, high-tech, export-oriented economy, where 75% of the economy is contributed by the services sector. Belgium has several competencies of our interest, such as port logistics, infrastructure, renewables, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, etc. And I'm sure you all know, almost 84% of the world's rough diamonds pass through Antwerp in Belgium. Antwerp is today the world's largest diamond trading center with a turnover of over 54 billion US dollars. And I'm mentioning this because Indian traders own a large part of this diamond trade in Antwerp. And one of the meetings the Prime Minister will be having there is a meeting with the diamond trading community of Antwerp. We have very friendly relations with Belgium, along with a very robust economic partnership. In fact, Belgium was one of the first Western countries with whom we established diplomatic relations right after we became independent in 1947. Next year, that is 2017, will mark the 70th anniversary of our diplomatic relations. Belgium has supported us on many of our political and strategic objectives. They have supported our quest for permanent membership of the UN Security Council. In 2008, they supported us in the NSG waiver. And very importantly, Belgium is India's second largest trading partner in the EU after Germany. And equally importantly, and probably may come as a surprise to you, India is Belgium's second largest export destination after the United States, outside of the EU. As JSXP rightly commented, most of this is trade in diamonds. In fact, more than 80% of our trade is diamond trade. In terms of PM's program in Belgium, I would like to highlight that the program covers all important strands of our strong engagement with Belgium: political and strategic, parliament, trade and investment, science and technology, culture, and the Indian community. We all know that India and the EU are the world's largest democratic entities. We also have vibrant engagement with the parliaments of EU and Belgium. So the Honorable Prime Minister will begin his engagement that day by interacting with some European and Belgian members of parliament. On the cultural side, he will meet Indologists, people living in Belgium and close by who have a keen and abiding interest in India. He will then proceed to the historic Egmont Palace, where he will be received by the Belgian Prime Minister, His Excellency Mr. Charles Michel, and accorded a ceremonial welcome. The two Prime Ministers will have a restricted meeting where they will discuss bilateral issues and cooperation on global issues. This will be followed by a luncheon meeting hosted by the Belgian Prime Minister, where our Prime Minister will interact with leading Belgian businessmen and CEOs, as well as the heads of the 3 federal regions of Belgium. You would know that Belgium has one of the most decentralized governments in the world, with a lot of powers actually given to the regions in Belgium. The 3 of them, the heads of these 3 regions called the minister presidents, will be also present at the lunch. And this will give an opportunity to PM to encourage Belgian foreign direct investment into India and encourage Belgian participation in our flagship initiatives like Make in India, Clean India, Digital India. After the lunch, there would be an interesting technical activation ceremony. And the 2 leaders will be technically activating the largest telescope, optical telescope of its kind in Asia, located at Devasthal near Nainital. This is a big thing because it's a product of Indo-Belgian collaboration. India has collaborated with a Belgian company called Amos to produce this infrared steerable optical telescope, which is the first of its kind in the whole of Asia. And it's an example of what our 2 countries can achieve in the area of high technology when we work together. After the technical activation, the leaders will make press statements. And I've already mentioned the meeting with the Association of Diamond Traders in Antwerp. Now, what are the objectives we're looking at in this summit-level meeting with Belgium? We are looking to enhancing India-Belgium cooperation in areas of priority for us and areas that are of mutual interest, such as counterterrorism. The recent attacks in Brussels will, of course, be a very important part of the discussions. They'll be the starting point of the engagement. We will discuss advancing cooperation in renewable energy, biotechnology, shipping, ICT, and taxation. We will also discuss how to step up cooperation in global and multilateral issues. Also, how to step up high-level visits between both sides. As I mentioned before, Belgium has a very sizable Indian diaspora of about 20,000 people. So the visit is also an opportunity for the Prime Minister to meet with them and interact with them. So we're also looking at a community event in Brussels. That was about the India-Belgium summit. And if you permit me, sir, I'll move on to the India-EU summit. In the evening of the 30th of March, the Prime Minister will attend the 13th India-EU summit. As you know, this will be the first summit between the leaderships on both sides. In fact, both leaderships took charge around the same time in May 2014. The India-EU bilateral summits started in the year 2000. In 2004, we established the strategic partnership. India is one of the 10 strategic partners that EU has today. The last summit was held in New Delhi in 2012. As you know, despite all the challenges that you read about in the newspapers, the EU continues to be a global economic powerhouse as the biggest economy in the world with a GDP of $18 trillion. It continues to be the world's largest exporter and importer of goods and services, contributing to 16% of world trade. And for India, it is our largest export destination and trading partner. Our two-way trade, including services, amounts to $126 billion. It is also the largest source of foreign direct investment in India. 69 billion, which contributes to 26% of the total FDI, comes from the EU. EU is also one of the biggest repositories of advanced science and technology in which we are interested. And as you know, the EU is also an influential player globally. 2 of the permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council are EU countries. 4 of the G7 countries are EU countries. The EU participates in the G7, G20 meetings. It also negotiates in the WTO. It leads on several issues like human rights, climate change. It is also a world leader in establishing global norms and industry standards, whether they are pollution norms, environment norms, food safety, health standards. The EU norms, by and by, we see become global norms. So to summarize, there is a lot that we have at play in our engagement with the EU. And we have over 30 institutionalized dialogues today with the EU in practically every sphere of human activity. We have a truly multifaceted strategic partnership. Now, what do we hope to achieve through this summit meeting? First of all, we aim to reinvigorate our engagement with the EU. We seek to advance the India-EU strategic partnership by deepening and expanding our cooperation in a way that the relationship has an across-the-board strategic content to it, and in a way that responds to present-day realities and our priorities. We will seek to urge the EU to become a bigger partner in our priority flagship development initiatives. We look at this summit as a summit that lays the groundwork for stepped-up cooperation between our 2 sides, because the leaderships have co-terminus mandates. Trade and investment will be an important part of our discussions too. In terms of the program, PM will interact with the President of the European Council, Mr. Donald Tusk, and the President of the European Commission, Mr. Jean-Claude Juncker. PM had met both these leaders recently at the G20 meeting in Antalya, Turkey in November last year. So the conversation will build upon that interaction. This will be followed by the signing and exchange of agreements and a working delegation level dinner where both sides will take stock of our bilateral cooperation in a range of areas. This will include political and security cooperation, trade and investment, including the India-EU Broad-Based Trade and Investment Agreement, popularly called BTIA, sectoral cooperation in specific areas like renewable energy, water, urban development, education, skilling, ICT, research, innovation, culture. We have a truly multifaceted engagement, so this dinner will have an agenda that covers all these elements. The leaders will, of course, also discuss regional and global issues of mutual interest. In terms of outcomes, we will, of course, issue joint statements, but we will also have a document that lays down a roadmap for the next 5 years, what all both sides undertake to do in different areas and sectors like political, security, trade, investment, energy, environment. You'll see it when it's released. The leaders will also announce new initiatives and joint declarations in different areas of common interest. You will also get to know about it soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Nandini, for that very comprehensive briefing on the India-Belgium and India-EU partnerships. I will now turn to Aman to brief you on Prime Minister's participation in the Nuclear Security Summit.
Thank you, Vikas. Good afternoon, everyone. The Prime Minister would be attending the 4th Nuclear Security Summit in Washington, D.C. on March 31st and 1st April. You are all aware that we have consistently upheld nuclear safety and security in the context of the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. Likewise, our strong and principled positions on international terrorism are well known. It is therefore natural for India to join other nations in combating the threat of nuclear terrorism. Prime Minister's participation at the summit underlines the priority we attach to strengthening nuclear security. To give you an overview of the program of the summit will begin with a leaders-only dinner at the White House on March 31st. The leaders of the 53 countries and the 4 international organizations that participate at the summit would gather at this working dinner to share their assessments of the threat of nuclear terrorism. Prime Minister will share India's assessment of the threat. The next day, on April 1st, there will be 3 plenary sessions. At the first plenary session, there would be a focus on national actions to enhance nuclear security. As you might be aware, the discussions at these summits are interactive, so there are no written read out statements. India's written national progress report would be circulated at the summit, and the Prime Minister would intervene in this discussion on national actions to underline some of the important measures we have taken to strengthen nuclear security. This first plenary would be followed by a working lunch where the focus of the discussions would be on international institutional actions to strengthen nuclear security. The focus would be on follow-up, international follow-up through institutions such as the International Atomic Energy Agency, the United Nations, the Interpol, the Global Initiative to Combat Nuclear Terrorism, and the G8 Global Partnership. This aspect of institutional follow-up has been an important focus of the Sherpas meetings over the past year and a half. And the Sherpas have prepared for the summit 5 draft action plans that focus on follow-up on nuclear security through these institutions. These action plans contain guidance for work in the post-2016 scenario on nuclear security within all these institutions in accordance with their respective mandates and their respective procedures. Now, in this regard, you are well aware that India places importance on the IEA's central role in international cooperation and technical and policy guidance in the area of nuclear security. You might also be aware that India has made strong contributions to the IEA, both in terms of human resources and financial resources over the years. And we've also made a strong contribution to the UN on nuclear security and on counterterrorism. India's resolution on measures against WMD terrorism has been adopted by the UN General Assembly by consensus since 2002. The summit would therefore provide us an opportunity to highlight our recent, ongoing, and proposed contributions at all these institutions. The third and final plenary discussion at the summit would be a policy discussion on nuclear terrorism based on a hypothetical scenario. You would appreciate that at this point we cannot share more details of this scenario. Let me just say here that this scenario would allow the leaders to have a realistic and a thoughtful conversation on and around the challenges posed by international terrorism, in particular the threat of nuclear and radiological terrorism. The summit would then conclude with the adoption of a brief communique and the 5 action plans that I have highlighted earlier. Let me close these opening remarks by underlining India's main expectations from the summit. India expects that the summit would contribute further to raising high-level awareness of the threat of nuclear terrorism and the need to strengthen international cooperation against terrorists and nuclear traffickers. We also expect that the summit would help bolster legal, institutional, and enforcement measures to strengthen the security of nuclear material, radioactive sources, associated facilities, and technologies. India also expects the summit to uphold confidence in the safe, secure, and safeguarded extension of nuclear power, which would be a critical requirement in reaching national and international goals on non-fossil fuel energy. To underline this point, I want to mention that in these two words, nuclear terrorism, the problem is not with the word nuclear material, facilities, or technology. The problem is with the associated aspect of terrorism, which we need to focus on. Thirdly, we expect that those who have not done so would sign up to and implement the legally binding instruments related to nuclear security. The International Convention on the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism, the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material and its 2005 amendment, and obligatory reporting under the UN Security Council Resolution 1540, which was adopted in 2004 and which has prohibitions and obligations related to non-state actors and export controls. And finally, we expect that the competent institutions, in particular the IAEA, which will soon be holding its second ministerial conference on nuclear security in December 2016, would be provisioned with adequate resources, both human and financial, to uphold international cooperation and to support, as required, national efforts to strengthen nuclear security. Thank you.
Thank you, Aman. From Washington, D.C., we now move to Riyadh and to Joint Secretary Gulf, Shri Mridul Kumar, to brief you on Prime Minister's very, very important visit to Saudi Arabia. Mridul.
Thank you, Vikas. Good afternoon. Prime Minister is visiting Saudi Arabia on 2nd and 3rd of April at the invitation of His Majesty King Salman. This is the first bilateral engagement of Prime Minister with King Salman, but they have met separately on two occasions on the sidelines of G20 meetings in 2014 and 2015. There has been a regular exchange of visits between our two countries. The last visit of our Prime Minister was in 2010, when Dr. Manmohan Singh went to Saudi Arabia, and Riyadh Declaration was issued, which elevated our partnership to a strategic level. From the Saudi Arabia side also, in 2006, King Abdullah came here, and that was a landmark visit because it took place after a long gap of 5 decades. In that visit, we issued the famous Delhi Declaration, which provided the bedrock of our relationship in this century. Subsequently, the present King Salman, when he was the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, he visited India in 2014 February. He was also the Defense Minister, and during that visit, we signed a very important agreement on defense cooperation, which provided a key impetus to our strategic partnership with Saudi Arabia. If you look at the importance of Saudi Arabia, it's very well known. Saudi Arabia is the largest GCC country. It is also providing 1/4 of the total Arab countries' GDP and half of the GDP of GCC countries. Huge resources of oil and natural gas. It has massive reserves of foreign exchange running into almost $700 billion. If you look at India's relationship with Saudi Arabia, there are 4 key aspects of this relationship. One is energy, then community. We are talking about Hajj and security cooperation. Saudi Arabia is definitely a very key partner for us in regional and global matters. We have very good functional working mechanisms with Saudi Arabia. The Joint Commission meetings have been taking place on a regular basis. The latest one took place in last year. We have working arrangements on labor issues. We have ministerial dialogue on energy cooperation. Saudi Arabia is our 4th largest trading partner. You will be surprised to know that our exports are exceeding $11 billion to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is also one of the biggest supplier of energy to us. Almost 20% of our crude supplies come from Saudi Arabia. Last year, we imported about $21 billion of crude. If you look at our community, which is again a very key aspect of our ties, this is the largest expatriate community abroad. About 2.96 million Indians live there. and they send about over $10 billion in remittances every year. Another key aspect of our ties with Saudi Arabia is the annual Hajj and Umrah pilgrimage. Over 134,000 Indians go for Hajj pilgrimage every year, and almost 3 lakh pilgrims go for Umrah. A new aspect of our relationship has emerged in the last, I should say, 6-7 years, which is a very intense, close security cooperation between our security agencies. I have read from newspapers a lot of key operatives handed over by Saudi Arabia, including Abu Jandal, recently Abdul Aziz, Alais Gidda, reported by the press. I mentioned to you about the 2014 agreement with Saudi Arabia in the field of defense. Now that agreement is also, we are taking very seriously, and this is another area of emergence and importance to us. Obviously, this very important visit will allow discussions on all issues of bilateral importance, regional and multilateral importance. If you look at Prime Minister's program, he will be reaching Riyadh on 2nd in the afternoon, and his prime host will be King Salman. His first engagement will be visit to Masmak Fortress. This was a fortress which is a testimony to the history of modern-day Saudi Arabia. 1902, King Abdul Aziz of Saudi Arabia took over that fortress, Masmak. He took over that fortress in a sudden attack, and from there, the entire history of the third state of Saudi Arabia started. Soon after, PM will go to meet with our Indian community members. Obviously, I mentioned to you, this is a very important aspect of our ties with Saudi Arabia. In the evening, he will be visiting the L&T Workers Residential Complex. You might be aware that L&T is currently engaged in construction of Riyadh Metro project. And it's a massive project. One of the lines is being constructed by them. The total project cost is over $6 billion, out of which $2 billion are being done by L&T. So Prime Minister will be visiting the residential complex of our workers. Next day, on 3rd April, he will be going to the Tata Consultancy Services All-Women IT Center. It's a very happy thing that he will be doing, because this center provides employment opportunities to Saudi women. And this is the empowerment of Saudi women. When this center started 2 years back, there were 80 people in that center. It has now grown to over 1,000. 80% of the workers there are local Saudi girls. You will also be happy to note that over 60% of graduates from Saudi Arabia are females. So this provides a very good opportunity for the local Saudi females to find a job opportunity. And by the way, this is the first BPO operation by any company in the world in Saudi Arabia, more so for women. So it's a very important statement that we will be making there. Soon after, Prime Minister will be meeting with the select top Saudi business leaders. The official ceremony at the Royal Court will start in the afternoon, when King Salman will be receiving the Prime Minister in an official ceremony. There will be lunch hosted by King Salman, in which the key Saudi ministers, other leaders will be present, followed by delegation-level meetings and signing of agreements. There will be occasions to meet with some other Saudi leadership also. And in the evening, late in the afternoon, Prime Minister will be leaving Saudi Arabia for India. In terms of our expectation, it is very evident that our relationship with Saudi is extremely important. If you look at any aspect of our ties, they provide 20% of our energy supplies. So we have to make sure that this supply continues. And this is one of the key agenda points that Prime Minister will be discussing with King Salman. The other important aspect of our ties is the Indian community, expatriate community, and to ensure their well-being, to ensure their welfare will be on the agenda. The Ministry of External Affairs has recently announced the opening of 2 Indian Workers Resource Centers in Jeddah and Riyadh on the lines of what has been done in Dubai a few years ago when the President went there. And this is another welfare mechanism that we have created to look after this huge community spread over an area which is 2/3 the size of India. The Prime Minister will also be discussing ways and means to promote bilateral investment ties. In the last visit of the then Crown Prince Salman to India in 2014, there was an understanding that we will continue to work to enhance our investment ties in the private sector. So there will be discussions on that. You are aware that Hajj is a very important issue for Indian Muslims. We will request for continued Saudi cooperation for smooth Hajj operations in 2016 also. There are a lot of Indian companies present in Saudi Arabia. I mentioned to you that Prime Minister will be visiting 2 companies, L&T and TCS. There will be occasions to request for greater involvement of our companies in Saudi infrastructure projects. Saudis are undertaking almost $1 trillion of infrastructure projects for the next 5 years. And we will request Saudis to look at the competence of Indian companies in this regard. Of course, there will be some agreements signed during the visit. I'll sum up by telling you that Gulf is a very critical area for us. If you look at various aspects of our ties there, last time when I briefed the press, I was talking about 7 million Indians living in Gulf. Today, the figures have reached 8 million. It's ever-increasing numbers. If you are looking at the energy supply, almost half of our crude supplies and almost 80% of our gas supplies come from Gulf. Gulf provides almost $35 to $40 billion of remittances to India. And the new areas of cooperation which have emerged very recently and on which there is a clear understanding between India and our Gulf interlocutors are security, counterterrorism, and defense areas. So if you look at the entirety of our ties with Gulf, this is a message that Prime Minister is making to the Gulf leadership, that the new government is very keen to continually engage the leadership in a political dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mridul. I thank all my colleagues for this very comprehensive briefing on Prime Minister's visits to these 3 important places. I am sure that you have no questions, but if you still have any questions, Ranjit.
What is the status of FTA between India and EU? Do you think it will be finalized during the summit?
The agreement that we are negotiating with the EU is called the BTIA. It's a broad-based trade and investment agreement. It's not an FTA. As you know, we have been negotiating this with the EU for some time now. And there was a meeting between our Commerce Minister and her EU counterpart, the EU Trade Commissioner, on the sidelines of the OECD Trade Ministers meeting in June last year. And both sides agreed to talk at various levels to see how the few outstanding issues could be resolved, and we could advance to finalize the agreement. So consequent to that, some of you might have followed, in January there was a meeting between the chief negotiators in Delhi, where we reaffirmed our interest in finalizing the BTIA as Government of India. And following that, in February, that is last month, our Commerce Secretary visited Brussels with the chief negotiator. They had discussions with their counterparts in detail, and we are engaging with the EU on how to move forward on the BTIA.
Smita Sharma.
Because is there any formal proposal yet either from New Delhi or Islamabad for that meeting between Nawaz Sharif and Narendra Modi, or are we looking at a pull aside? And Aman, in terms of the nuclear terrorism, especially the kind of situation that we are seeing inside Pakistan and the Afpak situation, what are India's concerns really about nuclear security in the neighborhood in Pakistan?
The focus in the Nuclear Security Summit has not been on specific geographies as such, but as India, we are concerned about the security of not just nuclear material and radioactive sources around India and globally, but also the security of nuclear facilities, the existence of insider threats, the existence of networks whereby technologies, information can be trafficked. So those concerns are well known, and the summit process provides us with an opportunity to work with other nations in a cooperative spirit to raise nuclear security standards around the world, because a weak link in the chain can be found in any geography, in any location.
It is customary for world leaders to have bilateral meetings on the sidelines of major international events. I'm sure Prime Minister would be having some bilateral meetings on the sidelines of the Nuclear Security Summit. Many of these meetings are still work in progress. They will depend on the schedules of the two leaders. So I'm not in a position to tell you any of the bilaterals which have been scheduled till now. Right at the back.
This is for Amandeep. Can you tell us something about the status of our plans to join the NSG and the other three nuclear global outfits? And will this likely figure in any talks Mr. Modi may have with Barack Obama on the sidelines of the summit? Thanks.
Issues related to the export control regimes, nuclear disarmament, non-proliferation are not on the agenda of the NSS. But you know that this is an important issue for India. We are interested in membership of all the 4 export control regimes. We believe that India's membership of those regimes would strengthen the international non-proliferation objectives. And we are engaged with the regimes as entities, as collective entities, as well as with the individual members of those regimes, with a view to reaching that objective as soon as possible.
My question is for Ms. Nandini Singla. I'm Padma Rao. Nandini, I just wanted to know, as you're aware, the biggest crisis facing the European Union right now and its largest economy are the refugees, the Syrian refugees. And there's been a very sharp political, I would call it a divide and a social divide and all that kind of thing. Is that one, since you didn't mention it, is the advent of, or the onslaught of refugees, if you like, one of the subjects that is going to be discussed? And if so, what is on the agenda exactly? Does India want to help? Can India help? Have you been approached for any kind of, cooperation on the front of soft diplomacy? And I would go one step further and extend that to Joint Secretary Mridul Kumar as to whether, one of the criticisms coming out of Europe is the fact that the Gulf states have shown very little interest in assisting the Syrian refugees, whether there will be some sort of synergy between these 2 visits. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yes, you're right. I think the refugee crisis is one of the biggest crises that the EU is facing right now. It's facing others too. There is the Brexit, there's the Eurozone crisis, and after the Brussels terror attacks, frankly, terrorism is at the top of everyone's mind in Europe today. So I'm sure all these strands will be woven into the conversations between our leaders. As for India being asked to assist or to play any particular role, I don't think we've been asked to do so.
Yeah.
Madam, this is a question for you. The BTIA, there are yet concerns for the Indian industry. The areas like data exclusivity, intellectual property rights, the dairy sectors, these are the concerns for the Indian industry. If we agree to the European Union's demand, so you are saying that there is a progress in the talks for BTIA. In which direction are we able to resolve these concerns before the BTIA is finalized?
Well, you have mentioned some of the areas where we have concerns, and these are exactly the areas on which dialogue is happening. You must appreciate that the EU has similar concerns too on their side. It's not a one-way street. So when we talk about BTIA negotiations, we are talking exactly about discussing these very issues. And if you ask me what I mean by progress, It's frankly movement forward on these very issues. Because at the end of the day, we have to come to an agreement that is not only fair and balanced, but an agreement that addresses core interests on both sides.
मेरा नाम है। आपने अभी अपने पूरे स्टेटमेंट में बार बार ये जोर दिया 20% एनर्जी का जो एक्सपोर्ट है भारत के लिए वो महत्वपूर्ण है। तो इसके पीछे मेरी नज़र से कुछ रिपोर्ट्स गुजरी हैं, कुछ मैंने मिक्स रिपोर्ट पढ़ी भी हैं। तो क्या ऐसा कुछ आशंका जता रहे हैं या उसको आप ज़्यादा जोर दे रहे हैं या महत्वपूर्ण बता रहे हैं? इसके पीछे ऐसा क्यों आपने उसको बार बार जोर दिया, उससे जुड़ा सवाल है मेरा। धन्यवाद।
देखिए, आशंका तो कुछ नहीं है, लेकिन किसी भी रिलेशनशिप में कुछ की पॉइंट्स होते हैं। तो अगर आप सऊदी अरबिया और जीसीसी कंट्रीज़ के साथ हमारे ताल्लुकात देखें तो उसमें एक मुख्य केंद्र बिंदु जो निकल के आता है वो एनर्जी सप्लाई का है। और आप ये भी मानेंगे कि हमारे अच्छे बुरे टाइम पर जीसीसी कंट्रीज़ ने कभी भी हमारी तेल की सप्लाई नहीं रोकी है। तो ये रनिंग वाटर की तरह है, जिस दिन पानी की सप्लाई रुक जाती है उस दिन उसकी कीमत का एहसास होता है। तो ये चीज़ हम हमेशा एजेंडे पर रखना चाहते हैं कि जब भी हम जीसीसी कंट्रीज़ के साथ मिलें या इराक के साथ मिलें, हम ज़रूर तेल के संबंध में बात करें। आशंकाएं कोई नहीं है, व्यवधान कोई नहीं है, लेकिन ये इतना महत्वपूर्ण पक्ष है कि जिसको आप नेग्लेक्ट नहीं कर सकते।
Kalol at the back. And then Manish Chand.
Sir, you talked of security of Indian nationals in the GCC region. You know the March 4th attack on the Missionaries of Charity home in Aden, which took place when the Saudis were bombarding the area. Today, a priest is reportedly crucified, though we are awaiting confirmation. Will these issues also figure in your talks with the Saudi leaders?
I'm not aware of the news about crucifixion of Indian priest in Yemen, though obviously there was a terrible attack in Yemen on the elderly home in which some of our nuns and father was there. You are aware that we have a running advisory since almost 1.5 years now. We have requested Indian nationals not to go to such areas, and definitely there have been repeated advisories on Yemen, and this comes in that context also. The safety and security of our nationals in GCC countries, you're talking about Yemen. Yemen is, by the way, not a GCC country. So in GCC countries, yeah, so if you are looking at Saudi Arabia, our nationals are not only increasing in number, they are very well contributing to the local economy, and they are sending a lot of remittances. As I mentioned, it's almost $10 billion. But definitely continued welfare, well-being of our nationals there in these countries remain very high on our agenda.
Manish Chand.
Terrorism the threat posed by the Islamic State is probably a cross-cutting theme through the Prime Minister trip to all these three countries. My question is to Nandini and Mridul, that when we talk about European Union, we have individual counter-terror cooperation with individual countries. But at the AU level, we have some institution. Are we going with some new ideas, especially focused on Islamic State, because it poses a different kind of threat, and requires a more focused response? And similarly with Saudi Arabia, for the past few years, Saudi Arabia has been fairly cooperative in handing over some of our fugitives and all that. With Islamic State, what is our strategy? I mean, how do we plan to expand counter-terror cooperation with Saudi Arabia?
Thanks for that question. Yes, with the EU, we actually have a joint working group on counterterrorism. And it's not just on counterterrorism, we actually have dialogues on security issues and various aspects of security, including cyber security. In the light of recent terror attacks, understandably, there is a renewed focus and emphasis on cooperation in counterterrorism. This will be certainly on the agenda for discussion. And what will also be on the agenda for discussion is how do we deepen and expand this cooperation with the EU as an entity. As you rightly point out, we have these mechanisms and modalities with EU member states bilaterally. A big part of this summit would be to see how our institutional relationship with the EU can complement, supplement, and strengthen our bilateral partnerships in such priority areas with our key EU partners.
I mentioned that we have excellent cooperation between our security agencies with Saudi Arabia. If you are looking at various aspects, including money laundering, terrorist financing, narco-terrorism, etc., there have been collaborations between our two agencies. I also mentioned that Abu Jindal 2012, Abu Sufyan December 2015, Abdul Jeddah February 2016. These are some examples in which Saudi security agencies have looked after our very core interests on security matters.
Arunim.
My question is to the JSU and JS Gulf. Can you give us an idea of the diaspora meets, the scale of the diaspora meets that are going to be held in Brussels as well as in Riyadh, compared to the events that were held in Dubai, London, or Kuala Lumpur for that matter? How many people are expected to attend?
He's in the comparison business.
Unfortunately, I don't think we can really compare. In Belgium, as I mentioned, we have a diaspora of about 20,000 people. 10,000 out of those are Indian nationals. There is about 2,500 people work in the diamond industry, 1,500 professionals, 800 students. So it's a mixed kind of profile of the Indian community there. And the PM is open to seeing as many as would turn up at this event. And it's very difficult to give a precise figure or say that we are expecting so many people. As you understand, this depends on several factors, and factors that we don't necessarily control.
Saudi Arabia is not a good example to draw comparisons. There is a problem of plenty here. It is the largest expatriate community abroad. So in terms of numbers, I can't make comparisons. But of course, we have looked at the profile of our community, and accordingly we have structured a number of engagements of our Prime Minister with different community components. For example, when I talk about TCS, it's a very niche area, white-collared professional community. When you're talking about L&T workers, again, you're addressing a different category of people. Indian community interaction will also be there. So instead of one only event, because the community is so big, it's so diverse, it has to be a variety of events. And these events are being factored into Prime Minister's program.
Naz.
I would like to know whether India will be looking for cooperation with Saudi Arabia in the area of anti-radicalization. Are they already cooperating on this issue, and at what platform and in what ways?
Saudi Arabia has been in the forefront of this particular issue. Though there is no direct interaction in terms of de-radicalization, but obviously this remains a big time on our agenda.
Parul.
Will India be hoping to sort of mend its ties with Italy during its summit with the EU? Especially after, the Italian Marines' arrest, etc. And also because there were reports that Italy had blocked India's application to the MTCR last year.
MTCR thing I have already commented in my past press conferences, so I'll get the other part.
Thanks for the question, Parul. Well, as far as our bilateral relationship with Italy goes, we don't really see it as mending our ties, because we have always wanted a vibrant, robust partnership with Italy. We see Italy as a key EU partner country. And with regard to the Italian Marines issue that you alluded to, as you know, Italy has referred this dispute to the UN Arbitration Tribunal under the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas. And you might also know that India has joined this arbitration process. We have already participated in one of the hearings last year in Hamburg, and we continue to do so. And as you know, under any such international arbitration process, the parties commit to abide by whatever decision the arbitration tribunal gives. And therefore, this issue is not really a bilateral issue anymore. It's been taken out of the bilateral ambit to an international arbitration process, a process to which both parties stand committed.
मृदुल सर, मैं मनोज शर्मा हूँ दैनिक भास्कर.com से। यूएई की यात्रा पर पीएम जा रहे हैं। ऐसा माना जाता है कि आईएसएस सिंपैथी रखता है सऊदी अरब, सिंपैथाइजर है आईएस का सऊदी अरबिया, तो क्या वो सॉफ्ट कॉर्नर रखता है आईएस के प्रति? और तो क्या प्रधानमंत्री चाहेंगे कि उनके साथ इस तरह के, क्योंकि आईएस से खतरा भारत के लिए बढ़ता जा रहा है और बड़ी कम्युनिटी इंडियन है वहाँ पर, तो कुछ इस तरह का मैकेनिज्म हो ताकि पीएम का कंसर्न क्या होगा?
जहाँ तक मुझे ज्ञात है, सऊदी अरेबिया ने कुछ कंट्रीज़ का कोलिशन बनाया है टेररिज्म के खिलाफ, और जो आप मुझे बात बता रहे हैं मेरे लिए तो एक नई खबर है।
Sridhar.
So Pakistan has always sought to draw a link of sorts between nuclear security and the Kashmir issue. In fact, a few months ago we had reports that their defense minister had told Pakistani reporters that they had even miniaturized nuclear weapons to attack Indian strike formations in case of a conflict. So this hypothetical scenario that you mentioned, will it also involve conflict between two nuclear armed neighbors or states?
Not at all. You're actually talking of a very different situation and a very different issue. The Nuclear Security Summit, the issue of nuclear security, is about protecting nuclear material and nuclear facility from malicious actors. So it is about the bad guys getting in, and whereas nuclear safety is about material getting out through an accident and otherwise. The scenario that you're describing is something that's related to nuclear weapons deployment, possible nuclear use of nuclear weapons, etc. So this has nothing to do with the Nuclear Security Summit.
Anima. No, you're done.
This question is for Nandini ma'am. We have seen how issues about pharma consignments getting seized, on transit to EU has always been an issue. Recently, EU has also made some changes in their trademark policy that has hampered our generic drugs exports. Will that feature prominently in PM's, discussions?
Trade and investment is a very big part of our engagement with the EU. As I said, EU is our largest trading partner. It's our biggest export destination. So we have a lot of issues to talk to the EU with. And the issue that you mentioned is certainly one of them. There are many others, but this is one of them, and it'll come up in the discussion for sure.
Well, ma'am, during the last visit of President of India to Belgium, there was some discussion on cooperation in the shipping sector. So whether during the Prime Minister's visit, will there be any formalization of this in the form of agreement of those discussions?
You're very right. Shipping is one of the priority sectors for collaboration with Belgium. Belgium has this unique fact, which is that anywhere from any point in Belgium, less than 200 kilometers is a big port, and that is one of the biggest hubs for shipping and port development. As far as an agreement on this is concerned, we actually finalized one with the Flanders region after the President's visit. And in fact, we have set up a state-of-the-art training facility for port officials, not just from India, but also from our neighboring countries at the JNPT in Mumbai. And that has taken off, and we are looking at building further on that. So even if there is no formal agreement that we are signing during this visit, there is a lot that's already happening in this sector between our two countries.
Okay, last question.
Sir, there is much anxiety among the expatriates in Gulf, especially in Saudi Arabia due to their various measures like Nitaq. Will this be a talking point during Prime Minister's visit there?
I have been mentioning right in the context of our expatriate community in Saudi Arabia, there has been an increase all through. I have seen this trend in the last 4 years. Today it is the largest expatriate community. It's doing very well for themselves as well as for their host country. Obviously, they remain a very important organic link between our two nations. So there will be naturally some discussions on their welfare mechanisms, etc., between the two leaders. But I don't see any major troubles at present that are being encountered by our very well-growing Indian community there.
This concludes the press briefing. Thank you all.